So, with all that's happening with the Epstein files reveals, and specifically the constant repeated inclusion and conversation and exchange and friendship that is clearly being exposed between Noam Chomsky and Jeffrey Epstein, I wanted to quickly revisit the what has actually been an ongoing kind of debate in some pockets of the left for years, and in some spaces, even in black political circles, of who our favorite white scholars are. And as I and others have pointed out for years, when it came to the issue of media and politics, though Chomsky was much more popular, Michael Parenti was actually the much better theorist, political analyst, and thinker. So while Chomsky is going through what some are calling an exposure of who he actually is and was, and what kind of political thinker he actually was, and how insufficiently left he actually is. And salute to Gabriel Rockhill and some of the great conversations he's been having in his new book that really lays out the problems with not just Chomsky, but an entire infrastructure of Western thought and approaches to Marxism, which is really in a defense or really a condemnation of communism. And actual left politics, we see some really good criticism there of Chomsky and so on. And in a recent discussion, and the link to which I'll put in the show description, a really good interview, almost as good as the one Rockhill did with Mtume Gant. I'll also put that in the show description. But in this one, Rockhill makes a point about, again, making this comparison between Michael Parenti, the recently deceased political scientist, and how his career had taken a much more marginal trajectory compared to Chomsky, just because of his Parenti being actually left and having real anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist politics. But Rockhill makes this point that there was this essay that Parenti wrote called Another View of Chomsky from Nature, Society, and Thought in November of 1999, which I had never read and struggled to find, and have only found this copy of it. Again, I'll put the link in the show description from the communist Reddit channel, communism Reddit channel page. So salute to them for having it. And I thought we would just go through it briefly, because it also starts with Parenti criticizing Robert McChesney, who is another one of my former white favorite scholars, someone who I met and had some conversations and interviews with, some criticism of, in terms of his not inviting Glenn Ford to his podcast, despite referencing him a couple of times. Eventually he corrected course on that, so thanks to them for that. We know that Robert McChesney was a legendary media scholar, and someone I've just reposted on the channel that I had a debate with. We'll come and check a little bit of that towards the end here. So when I saw that, I just said, well, let me just at least quickly put this together and say something, given this overlap between my affinity over the years for Parenti, my struggles and affinity over the years as well with Chomsky, but this more, I think, appropriate contextualization of the two of them that Rockhill is offering, and then reminding us to check back for what Parenti had to say about Chomsky some years ago, which is, I think, relevant and important to bring back today. Okay. So as I said, Parenti starts the essay, this relatively short essay, off by saying, in the April 1999 monthly review, Robert McChesney gives what amounts to an encomium to Noam Chomsky. McChesney credits the MIT professor with a leading battle for democracy against neoliberalism, demonstrating the absurdity of equating capitalism with democracy, and being the first to expose the media's complicity with the ruling class. I would suggest that in these several areas, credit for leading the way goes to the generations of Marxist writers and other progressive thinkers who fought the good fight well before Chomsky made his substantial and much appreciated contributions. More important is the question of Chomsky's politics. McChesney says that Chomsky can be characterized as an anarchist, or perhaps more accurately, a libertarian socialist. Libertarian socialist is a sweeping designation safely covering both sides of the street. Of course, the ambiguity is not McChesney's, but Chomsky's. As far as I know, Chomsky has never offered a clear explication of his anarcho-libertarian socialist ideology. That is to say, he has never explained to us how it would manifest itself in organized political struggle or actual social construction. So again, in the links to those Gabriel Rockhill interviews that I'm putting in the show description, you can hear Rockhill give much more context and substance behind Chomsky's career, his MIT relationship, his early work supportive of military and intelligence goals and interests, the use of his linguistic work. Obviously would make sense if you think about it. I had never really considered it, but it makes sense when Rockhill points that out, that Chomsky's linguistic work would have been perfect for those looking in an MIT context, who Rockhill reminds us 90% of their funding was coming from military and intelligence and state entities. So it makes perfect sense that they would want to engage from their perspective an important assessment of Chomsky's work in linguistics. Which was apparently I'm not familiar with the field too much, but apparently was revolutionary to the field. So, but if you want to manipulate and involve yourself in constructing the communicative infrastructure of a targeted community, it makes sense that Chomsky's work would have fit well there. And then Chomsky's ambiguity around his politics also fits well. McChesney, I as you can hear in that debate, I had a similar frustration with that kind of ambiguity, these left projecting arguments that don't find real support in as Parenti says here, organized political struggle or actual social construction. That is, how would these ideas manifest in those spaces? McChesney says that Noam Chomsky has been a persistent opponent and critic of communist and Leninist political states and parties. I would add that as a critic, Chomsky has yet to offer a systematic critique of existing communist parties and states, not that many others have. Here is a sampling of Chomsky's view on communism and Leninism. In an interview in Perception of April 1996, Chomsky tells us, the rise of corporations was in fact a manifestation of the same phenomena that led to fascism and Bolshevism, which sprang out of the same totalitarian soil. Like Orwell and most bourgeois opinion makers and academics, Chomsky treats communism and fascism as totalitarian twins, offering no class analysis of either, except to assert that they are both rooted in some unspecified way to today's corporate domination. And I should have started off with this. I can't believe it. It's even in my notes. This is a total error on my part, so forgive me, everybody. But what I meant to start off with is that why I've always known Parenti has been better analytically and politically than Chomsky is because of the two, only Parenti was assigned to us while I was a grad student in the Africana Studies and Research Center at Cornell University under the late great tutelage and directorship of Dr. James Turner. So my point being that Doc Turner said, no, read Democracy for a Few by Parenti, which I did, and it's fantastic. And that was part of our graduate experience, whereas Chomsky was never assigned to us by Dr. Turner. So I've always used that, admittedly, as a sort of foundation for how I've understood the difference between the two. And then once engaging their work, Inventing Reality and the many other books and writings of Parenti and his speeches and his Parenti was far superior than Chomsky, even before these revelations and exposures of Chomsky's relationship with Epstein. And to Rockhill's point, Parenti would have never and could not have ever been co-opted to that in that way, and would not have been and would not involved with Epstein, and therefore would not have certainly been invited or shown up in these emails, and then certainly would not have had these friendly exchanges that Chomsky and his wife had been having with Epstein. In Z Magazine of October 1995, 4 years after the Soviet Union had been overthrown, Chomsky warns us of left intellectuals who try to rise to power on the backs of mass popular movements and then beat the people into submission. You start off as basically a Leninist who is going to be part of a part of a red bureaucracy. You see later that power doesn't lie that way, and you very quickly become an ideologist of the right. We're seeing it right now in the Soviet Union. The same guys who were communist thugs 2 years back are now running banks and are enthusiastic free marketeers and praising America. In its choice of words and ahistorical crudity, this statement is rather breathtaking. The Leninist communist thugs did not very quickly switch to the right after rising to power. For more than 70 years, they struggled in the face of momentous Western capitalist and Nazi onslaughts to keep the Soviet system alive. To be sure, the USSR's waning days, many like Boris Yeltsin crossed over to capitalism's ranks, but other Reds continued to resist free market incursions at great cost to themselves, many meeting their deaths during Yeltsin's violent repression of the Russian parliament in 1993. In the same perception interview cited above, Chomsky offers another embarrassingly ill-informed comment about Leninism. Western and also third world intellectuals were attracted to the Bolshevik counter-revolution because Leninism is, after all, a doctrine that says that radical intelligentsia have a right to take power and to run their countries by force, and that is an idea which is rather appealing to intellectuals. Here, Chomsky fashions a cartoon image of ruthless intellectuals to go along with his cartoon image of ruthless Leninists. They do not want the power to end hunger, they merely hunger for power. In his book Powers and Prospects, 1996, Chomsky begins to sound like Ronald Reagan when he announces that communism was a monstrosity and that the collapse of tyranny in Eastern Europe and Russia is an occasion for rejoicing for anyone who values freedom and human dignity. So not only was Chomsky wrong about that, but as I just want to quickly remind, Reagan did die during our wedding, and salute as we did that day. Parenti continues, tell that to the hungry pensioners and child prostitutes in Gorky Park. I treasure freedom and human dignity as much as anyone, yet I find no occasion for rejoicing. The post-communist societies do not represent a net gain for such values. If anything, what we are witnessing is a colossal victory for gangster capitalism in the former Soviet Union. That's a great book, by the way. I think the author was, assassinated, but something about Russia and the rise of gangster capitalism came out, 20 years ago. It was really good book. The strengthening of the most retrograde forms of global capitalism and economic inequality around the world, a heartless and unrestrained increase in imperialistic aggression, and serious setback for revolutionary liberation struggles everywhere. We should keep in mind that Chomsky's political underdevelopment is shared by many on the left whose critical views of corporate America represent their full ideological grasp of the political world. Be he an anarcho-liberation and libertarian socialist, anarcho-syndicalist socialist, or just an anarchist, Chomsky appeals to many of the young and not so young, for he can evade all the hard questions about organized struggle, the search for a revolutionary path, the need to develop and sustain a mass resistance, the necessity of developing armed socialist state power and that can defend itself against the capitalist counter-revolutionary onslaught, and all the attendant problems, abuses, mistakes, victories, defeats, and crimes of communist revolutionary countries and their allies. It's bars. We used to say about the Trotskyites, can apply to what we used to say about the Trotskyites can apply to the Chomskyites. They support every revolution except those that succeed. Cuba might be the exception. Chomsky usually leaves that country unmentioned in his side swipes at existing or once existing communist countries. Most often, organized working class struggles and vanguard parties are written off by many of the left, including Chomsky, as Stalinist, a favorite obsessional pejorative made all the more useful by remaining forever undefined, or Leninist, which is Chomsky's code word for communist governments and movements that have actually gained state power and fought against the West to stay in power. And remember, by the way, since just revisited that, that's exactly how Dr. King was described in the pages of the Washington Post within 90 days of his assassination, as a Leninist whose movements that summer of 1968 were to be taken over by the Black Power rights and the Leninists and the Kwame Tureists. Well, they were calling him Stokely at the time, but you get the point. So Parenti's argument and framing here regarding Chomsky and why Chomsky would be more popular than Parenti, though Parenti's not making that particular point in this essay, makes perfect sense and is clearly understandable. Through all this label slinging, no recognition is given to the horrendous battering such countries and movements endure from Western imperialists. No thought is given to the enormously distorting impact of capitalist counter-revolutionary power upon the development of existing and once existing communist governments, nor the evils of international capital that the communists and their allies were able to hold back, evils that are becoming more and more apparent to us today. Bereft of a dialectical grasp of class power and class struggle, Chomsky and others have no critical defense against the ideological anti-communism that inundates the Western world, especially the United States. This is why, when talking about the corporations, Chomsky can sound as good as Ralph Nader, and when talking about existing communist movements in society, he can sound as bad as any right-wing pundit. In sum, I cannot join McChesney in heaping unqualified praise upon Noam Chomsky's views. When Chomsky departs from his well-paved road of anti-corporate expose and holds forth a communism and Leninism, he shoots from the hip with disappointingly facile and sometimes incomprehensible pronunciamentos. We should expect something better from our, quote, leading icon on the left. Yeah, Michael Parenti. Definitely check his book, Dirty Truths, Black Shirts and Reds in America Besieged, all on City Lights Books, as it says here. And we can see again why Parenti would have been marginalized, as Rockhill describes, in terms of his career, as opposed to Chomsky, whose books are still selling enormously well, and who has been invited to remain parallel, if not fully ensconced with power for his entire career. So rest in power and peace to Michael Parenti, and let's revisit his work and take the time of his passing to revisit the arguments that he was making, particularly if we're going to be invited to inferior analyses coming from similar perspective, or similar, that seemingly from similar perspectives, but are clearly different and worse. So just to bring it back full circle, as I started at the beginning and as Parenti started this essay, I want to play a clip from the exchange I had in 2012 with the now late Robert McChesney, the link to which is also will be in the show description. But I think especially given where we are in the world today, it ends on an unfortunately prescient note. By the way, my last point of this is that if we were to also skew or to study how coverage of non-white people goes by the white left, we would find very easily that much more coverage goes to, not that they don't deserve it, of course, to people overseas. So you get far more discussion of Palestinians, of other parts of the Middle East, parts of Central and South America, than you do of black people here in the United States. And I think primarily this is because of this unaddressed, sufficiently at least, tension between white and black in this country. And then this overriding notion that we've already dealt with those issues, let's move on. You had your civil rights movement, you now even have a black president, what more could you possibly want? I mean, you have, we see black people on TV all the time. What is the problem? Which, by the way, isn't even true anymore, in terms of primetime network television. Black people have almost disappeared. Black people aren't even the token minorities anymore, by the way, which I find interesting. The new token minorities, again, not that they don't deserve their own turn at being at tokenism, are Latin Americans and Asian descended people. And so black people are being completely erased from the discussion as their conditions worsen. And that's what is, I think, of great concern to me, and why I wanted to at least participate here.
Well, I think that your points are all really good. And let's talk about the broad points at the end, because I think that's really gets to the nub of the matter. And I'm in complete agreement about what's happening with African Americans in this country. I think the Michelle Alexander book, one of the brilliant points of that is it highlights exactly what is happening in the African American community as a result of the prison industrial complex and the drug war. But my point I was making, the optimism, was not that racism no longer exists at all, obviously, no. or that exploitation of people of color, in particular African Americans, doesn't exist, obviously. The point I was making, and the heartening point, is that the survey data I've been looking at and researching shows that there has been, that young people in this country today under the age of 29, and I think going forward, are less overtly, young white people, are less overtly responsive to racist calls, even dog whistle calls, than they were in the 1980s. In the 1980s, if we had an economy like this, I'd be scared to death, much more than I am today, that there would be grounds for a full-throttle racist fascist movement. And I'm not as worried about that today. And I think the evidence of that is to look at the people who do the dog whistle racist stuff like Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich when they talk about black people have to start working and stop being bums. Look at the audience of those talks. Look at the audience of Fox News. Look at the age of the average person voting in a Republican primary in response to this. They're all in their 50s and 60s. There's the only young people, there are very few young people there. And that was the point I was trying to make. And that's what I want to build on. That to me is extraordinarily encouraging. I would be deeply depressed if I found that people in their 20s had the same attitudes as people in their 60s. Then I join you at the ledge.
I just want to, and I think we're probably out of time. I just want to add one last statement to that, and but this is why James Baldwin was so correct years ago when he said you don't judge a society by instances of how many times I'm called nigger or catcalled or whatever. You judge it by its institutions, and the institutions of this society are as negatively impacting on black and brown and working people as ever. So my concern would be that this impression that because, as you said, the overt responses are not welcomed, that somehow we've advanced. And I think that is what makes the creeping fascism of this country even more threatening, because it won't have the appearance of a Hitler or Mussolini. It will have the appearance of, as I joke with my students, a Tyler Perry show. So that as we are being carted off to the death chambers, they'll be giving us a Tyler Perry movie on the screen, and we'll all laugh as they turn on the gas. And that's sort of what I'm saying about all of this. Why I'm so desperately trying to encourage a deeper and more radical engagement with these issues that go beyond the overt and the surface level. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.